That's great. Yeah, we're good with sound.
I'll check separately.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. We're going to get started. Ben's going to open up, and then I'm going to.
So the opening is just say I'm here, I guess, representing the Toronto Society for the Fusion of Useful Knowledge, which is just me. So I don't know if. Yeah, this Toronto Society is building intellectual infrastructure and maybe virtual infrastructure for the city of Toronto for the next 100 years. We're basically experimenting with education. I think that all of us can probably agree that there are flaws in the current education system in one way or another. We're probably not all 100% satisfied with our education. And so Toronto Society is trying to create intellectual community and infrastructure to support that community in educating themselves. And so this event will hopefully be a good example of that, and it'll give us a chance to learn something from one another. So yeah, that's what this is.
Awesome.
I think I had one experiment that I wanted to run this time. So forgive me for 1 second. We have these, they're basically prompt cards. They'll be useful later on when we actually move to a discussion period. But I kind of just want to hand these out. If everyone can take one, maybe just pass them around a little bit. And then I also have a bag of pens. And so if you need a pen to take notes, I don't know, if you want to take notes, you can. If you want to just take it, you can. And yeah, that hopefully will be useful later for questions. And that's it for me, I think.
Okay. Melody, did you want to say any housekeeping items before we get started? Or yeah. Okay, perfect. No, we're good. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for attending. This is, I'm super excited about the conversations we're going to have here today. This started from a tweet and clearly resonated with people. It stems from kind of my own spiritual journey that I've been on. And so, yeah, I just really wanted to open up the space for these conversations to happen. I'm finding that I'm having these conversations one-on-one with people, and there's definitely a place and need, I think, for these types of conversations, and us to understand different worldviews, different faiths beyond the ones that we typically practice. So that's what started this. The goal for today is to ultimately listen and understand other perspectives. We're not here to debate. We're not here to even just agree with each other and say, you know, like, yeah, this is great. We're going to hear different strong opinions, and that's okay. The point of the space is to bring those to light and understand them. We don't have to respond to them. If somebody says something that, you know, you deeply disagree with, you don't have to react right away. You know, it's okay that we could actually just, you know, let that sit and just really ask questions and try and seek to understand that. So just wanted to kind of start the conversation there. And ultimately, those strong opinions come from deeply held value systems that we all have. And understanding the similarities and differences is really important, and that's why we're all here. In terms of the schedule of how we're going to run the evening, we're going to start off with this panel. Each of the 4 people here today have planned a kind of response to the big question of what should the role of religion be in society be today, and what are the facts that have informed that worldview, so that we could just get a sampling of different perspectives, and we can really understand each of these people's views, and that will kind of serve as prompting for our own conversations. We're then going to go into small group discussion, where we're going to get into small groups of about 4, and we're going to discuss the questions that are on the prompt cards of, you know, what should the role of a religion be, you know, what is God? What is your definition of God? And why does it matter? And why does it matter for progress? So this panel is just meant to be a sampling of that before we ultimately kind of have the conversation amongst ourselves. And then at the end, we're going to bring it back into a big group discussion where we'll hear from a few different insights. We'll hear a few kind of highlights from the conversation overall, and then we'll just go into social hour afterwards. So we're never going to be at a place where we're having like a full group discussion and debating back and forth. We're going to be hearing like kind of like isolated points, if that makes sense. All right. And so with that, I'm going to kick off the panel with a little bit of my own worldview and a little bit of my own kind of like upbringing with religion, because I think that has ultimately guided this event here today, just because it's been a question that I've been thinking about a lot, specifically in the past few years. I personally grew up in like a pretty Catholic household. I went to Catholic school, grew up going to church every week. Religion class, if anybody else, went through Catholic school, religion class, I personally found it to be a little shallow, and I didn't really feel like I got the meaning that I wanted to get from that experience. I was kind of always waiting for more, but it stayed surface level for a long time. And I don't feel like I really took a sense of agency over my spiritual life when I was younger. And I kind of overreacted a little bit when I got to adulthood, where I went kind of to the opposite end. I'm like, totally free will, total logic, like none of this exists. There's a little bit of an overreaction. And I don't think that's rare. I'm sure there's like a lot of people in the room that probably have that similar upbringing. And so even in Catholic school, when you're like 13, you're asked to like do your confirmation. Like, do you want to like agree to an adult life, in the church? And everyone in my community just like did it. Like I grew up in a very Italian community. So it's just like, everybody just does it. You don't have to question it. I knew at the time, I was like, I am not prepared to make this decision, but everybody's doing it. So I guess we'll just do it kind of thing. But in hindsight, I'm like, whoa, like that was a huge decision I was not prepared to make. So just like thinking about the agency that we have in our spiritual lives is like really ringing now as an adult. And the reason in the past few years I've kind of been coming back to this question of what is the role of spirituality in my own life probably comes from the place of, especially like building businesses and that sort of thing. I almost take free will is really important, and you can actually get really far when you take a lot of responsibility, right? You have a lot of control over the outcomes and that sort of thing, but it doesn't fully solve the fact that there are things beyond your control. And those are very difficult things to grapple with. And more recently, I guess I'm questioning what is the role of God in those things that you cannot control? And to what extent is there a way that I could actually bring that in? And so that's the short of it. And we could probably get into it deeper, but I'll pause there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Misha. How it's going to work is Misha's going to share first, his own kind of like factual background of what's important for his worldview, and he's going to then go on to share, his thoughts on what he thinks the role of religion should be in society.
Is that what I'm going to do? Cool.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Well,
and I guess,
hopefully.
I think we had like different religions represented here. I'm not sure which one. I think I'm here for like atheism, which is arguably not a religion. It also, I think, probably means that, at least in my case, that I was probably spent a lot less time thinking about this than the people who think that God does exist for obvious reasons. So I'm not sure if my points will be as well thought out. And I think everyone here has probably thought about this a lot more than I have. And what I thought I'd do is I'm going to tell you like just a story. And the thing that I want to make clear is the story that I'm going to tell you now is it's like a made up story. And it's a made up story that's just to illustrate a point. And it's not true. It's just like something that I made up basically this afternoon. It's not real. I just want to say that before I started. Okay. And so we're going to start now. And I'm going to tell you the story. And the most important thing I want to tell you about the story is that some of this might be unsettling for you. Some of it might make you uncomfortable. But I really want to emphasize that the story that I have for you is good news. And I really want you to understand that you're safe. And I also want you to understand that Before, when I said this story wasn't real, that part wasn't true. The story's real. And so I want to tell you some things about the world that you might not know, and they might be hard to absorb. A lot of us have been thinking about artificial intelligence in the past while. We've been considering the possibility of something just vastly cognitively more advanced than us, something smarter and more intellectually superior, even spiritually superior than us, and imagining that someday that thing might come to be. And I'm here to tell you that that thing is already here. That it's here, and that it's actually been here for a very long time. And that you've been living inside of their world. That we're living inside the world that's created by those super intelligences. And you may have heard the word simulation, and it's like a simulation. It's not exactly that. To explain the difference is probably more than we could do in our short time, and maybe even more than we have the capacity to understand. But I'm here to tell you that. And I'm also, you might be wondering, like, why haven't I heard about this before? And the answer is because you're hearing about it right now. That everybody in this room, you're the people who have been chosen to be the first people to hear this. So I want you to really take a minute to think about who's here, to look around. And I also want you to think about everything in your life, every tiny little detail, all the random things, all the huge things, all the tiny things, without which you would not have been right here, right in this very special space, to receive this incredibly important news. And so what I want to tell you is that we live inside of this world. And I have to emphasize, the world is a world that's not supernatural. The superintelligence has come from the things you know about, from evolution and from physics, and also from things you don't know about yet, but which are things that are part of the natural world. There's no God, there's nothing magical. It's just science happening. And they want something. They want something from the people in this room. And what they want is this. The simulation that we've been living inside of, the world that we've been living inside of, is a series of tests. And what the intelligence want to find is they want to find this in a series of tests. The world has been filled with, what they want to find is people who have the mental strength to resist certain temptations. And what they've done is they've put temptations throughout the world. And those temptations are superstitions, they're quackery medicines like homeopathy, they're religions. They have filled the world with those temptations. And what these superintelligences are trying to do is find the people who have the mental strength to resist those temptations. And those people will get to go to the next level of being. And it's a level of being that you can't imagine. There'll be joy and love and connection more than you can imagine, a kind of end of suffering. But to do that, you have to really move beyond the temptations of superstitions that have been put in the world. Some of you are chosen because you've already done that. Some of you are chosen because the intelligence understands that there's something inside of you, maybe something you've even found yet that you don't know of yet, that makes you capable of doing that. Some of you may have been feeling that Toronto is a really special place. And it is, because it's one of the 2 or 3 cities where this is happening. What the intelligences want you to do is they want you to put aside, to move past those temptations that have been put in front of you by superstitions, by quack medicines, by religions, to move past them, and to spread the word to everyone in the world, to let them know this. And in so doing, we can bring an end to human suffering. We can bring a level of flourishing beyond that, which is ever possible in imagination. And all that we need to do is just do that very, very simple thing. So I just want you to take a minute. I know this might be uncomfortable for some of you, so just take a minute. Let that sink in. Maybe you've had a feeling of something missing in your life. Maybe this is what fills that in. Maybe you've had a feeling that things don't quite make sense. Maybe this is what fills that in. Maybe you've had a feeling that you're not quite where you need to be. This is where you need to be to do this. And you're doing that with these people. So take a minute to feel that love in the room from the people who are with you. To feel that, whatever that is inside of yourself. You may feel fear, that's normal too. And I just want to welcome you to this new era. Okay, so obviously, I'm also going to say in a minute that this wasn't true, but it's totally true. So obviously that wasn't true. That was all pretend. Maybe. And to me, when I look at that story, I'm like, well, sure, that story seems to me that it shares a lot of traits with what I see as religion. That you can't really prove it's true, but you also can't prove that it's false. It's kind of appealing. It fills in a bunch of gaps. It gives you some meaning. It seems to me that it's compatible with the world. So a thing that I hear a lot from people when they talk about religion is they say, well, how do you know? Like, maybe if you believe in Jesus, you'll go to heaven. I'm like, yeah, but maybe only the atheists go to heaven, which is the story that I just told. So who knows? To me, the story that only the atheists go to heaven seems just as plausible as the story that only the Christians go to heaven. I can't see any reason why one makes more sense than the other. The other thing that I'll say that I feel very strongly about is that there are definitely people who are smarter than me. I'm an atheist, but I also know there are people who are smarter than me, who have thought about this a lot more than me, who believe in God. And so I feel pretty strongly that I'm an atheist, but I don't particularly privilege ideas just because they're inside of my head. So I think even though I think that strongly, there's also smarter people than me who think different things. I'm not like super attached to proving to them that they're wrong. I think that's about it. That's what I think.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, Samara, you're up next.
Okay. That's a hard act to follow. I think my explanation is a little bit, I think it's more of like a personal story as well. But first, I'll start with, I will be quoting someone multiple times. So I just want to give a little bit of a brief description as to who that is and a bit about his background. So that's Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, who I'll be quoting throughout my opening statement. And just to give a little bit of background, he was an influential religious leader. He was the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom. And he grew up Jewish, but not religious. And he was educated at Oxford and Cambridge. And he became world renowned for his teachings on ethics, morality, and also interfaith dialogue. And so after, I have like a list of books, if anyone wants any recommendations on any of his teachings. He talks a lot about science and religion, and as well as interfaith dialogue. So a little bit about my background. Just like everyone else, my family's background spans generations and also continents. My great-grandparents were from the Ukraine and Russian, and my grandmother grew up Jewish in Mumbai in India, and with Iraqi roots as well. And I think the diversity of my identity has really brought me some appreciation for the global nature of religion, as well as our traditions today. And growing up in a vibrant Jewish community where Judaism was deeply intertwined in my daily life, my parents set an example just in their everyday observances and their professions, just throughout like their kindness and good nature, and always being on the lookout for who to help like within our community. And I think they really embodied the Jewish value of tikkun olam, which is repairing the world. And to me, repairing the world gives me a strong foundation of my Jewish identity. And not only my Jewish identity, and not only is Judaism a religion, but I also want to say that it's an ethnicity. It's a peoplehood, it's a culture. And you can be Jewish by birth or by belief. And there are those who are observant, there are those who are secular, but it doesn't matter if you're religious or you're not. If you're born Jewish, you're Jewish. And we all share a collective identity, a history, and a connection, and we're tied together by our ancestry, food, values, and our collective memory. And it's not about just rituals, it's about practices, it's about culture. And for me, I just want to talk about one part of the religion that brings meaning to me, which is Shabbat, which is the day of rest, the day of the Sabbath, which has always been an anchor to me and my family, where we bless the candles, the wine, and the bread. And growing up, we always went to my grandmother's house. And since her passing, we rotate every week. And we see my family every single week and share these same rituals. And it's not just rituals, it's really something that brings us together on a deeper level. And it's embedded in our everyday in our everyday. And what brings me to Judaism is that we're connected by generations. We're connected by a shared history. And I just want to quote Jonathan Sachs to say that to be a Jew is to be a link in the chain of generations. And the connection, it informs, thanks, this connection to our past informs our present and guides our future, emphasizing our role in contributing positively to society, not only focusing on the pursuits of today, but in the pursuits of our future, the betterment of society for the next generation. So really looking to the future. And as I mentioned previously, looking at Tikkun Olam as a pillar within Judaism. And I also want to say that what brought me back to Judaism growing up, my brother became very observant at a young age, and it totally changed like the family dynamic. We grew up like traditional, but not tied to like a black and white nature in any sense of the word. And like we weren't observant on the Sabbath, but again, we celebrated the rituals. We had Shabbat dinners. And to me at the time, I really pushed back. I pushed back on my Judaism. And as much as I enjoyed it, I wasn't sure what was holding me back. And I realized that I wasn't anti-religion. I just didn't want to be boxed into a strict set of rules or an all or nothing mentality. I wanted to be able to create my own rituals and create my own structure to living my everyday life. And I think that's really breathing Tikkun Olam, bringing people together. And as I said, like we're a link in the chain of generations. And then, sorry, it's a little bit long and hefty. But I do believe that the role of religion today is to have that sense of a collective, not as an individual. And I think today what we see is a religion of consumerism, a religion of individuality, of going viral, and this has become the epidemic of loneliness in our culture today, having that absence of religion, having the absence of a strong sense of not just beliefs, but rituals in our everyday lives that bring meaning. And I think people are trying to generally find a source of meaning in their lives through these through screens, through popularity, through labels and status. They're trying to find meaning. And so again, I want to quote Rabbi Sachs. And he writes that when religion dies and consumerism takes its place, people are left with a culture that encourages them to buy things they don't need with money they don't have for a happiness that won't last. It is a bad exchange, and it will end in tears. Sorry. And then, thank you. And I think what's really interesting is our value system has begun to disintegrate. And as that disintegration has begun, our society feels more fragmented and divisive. And we see that in our everyday lives. And I think when practicing religion thoughtfully and with the absence of extremism, there can bring a lot of meaning to everyone's lives in order to counter that and really bring that sense of belonging that people are really looking for in their lives without that consumerism and virality, and become something greater than ourselves. And looking at like everyone in this room who decided to be a part of this experimentation And anyway, I just want to end with, I think with the technological advancement and globalization, it's creating both progress and pressure, but also the values that religion brings to the table remain essential. So I just want to end on a quote by Rabbi Sachs, that science takes things apart to see how they work, and religion puts things together to see what they mean. And I think that we need both. We need science to help us innovate and bring progress, but we need religion to help us navigate our everyday challenges and really bring that meaning to life. And that guides us towards advancement and progress. And we all have a shared responsibility towards the progress and innovation. For that very long.
I have to make a joke. I love the symbolism that I took the Jewish person on the panel's notes, and then I'm gonna build on that next. I didn't help it. My bad. Okay. So I don't have a structure to this, so I apologize if I'm not perfectly structured, but I have some things that I want to say. So the first thing to say is, I believe something much crazier than Misha's story. So I believe in Jesus Christ, that there was a man, a Jewish man, and he was born of the Virgin Mary. He died, and then he came back to life, and that as a result, our sins are forgiven, and we are free in Him, which is about as crazy, I think, a belief as will be stated here tonight. I hope maybe we go further. Angels could be involved. But yeah, so that's, I guess, a good place to start. I think maybe what I can do is I'll give like a brief spiritual biography to explain like how I came to that position, so that maybe it doesn't seem quite so crazy. But I can imagine that to a lot of people, like just those words are immediately strange, right? Like they were certainly very strange to me at many points in my life. So I was raised atheist. My family is atheist. We didn't really talk about religion. If we did talk about religion, then it would have been negative when it came up, that religion was like a thing that held back society in some way. When I was like 13, I think like a lot of people, I had that kind of obnoxious new atheist phase where I listened to like Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens, and I was like, oh wow, this is like the worst thing ever. We should definitely get rid of all of these like idiotic religious people. They're holding back progress in science. And then throughout high school, when I was like in my later teenage years, I met some slightly more philosophically nuanced people who had maybe a little bit more chops in thinking about these things. And I came to the position that like logically, technically, I'd have to be agnostic. You can't really like prove this thing one way or another. But to all intents and purposes, like I was an atheist in my like behavior, right? I was like behaviorally atheist. I didn't like believe that there was some tradition. I hadn't been like associated with a tradition in my life, so I didn't have like the content in some sense of it to relate to. I was actually quite troubled in my late teenage years and in university. And when I was in university, I like partied all the time. I took a lot of drugs. I got terrible grades, and I actually got suspended from school at one point. And while I was suspended from school, I was sitting on my bed and I was reading Nature by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And I had this intense religious experience. If you're familiar with like William James and the varieties of religious experience, it's the kind of, now I didn't have the language at the time, but I had this experience of like a divine presence infusing the entire world, a sense of like dissolution and unity. I had this just overwhelming sense of love for everything and everybody. And it lasted like many hours and into the next day. And in some sense, it's still with me, but certainly not in the same intense way. And from that moment, and it wasn't instantaneous at all, but from that moment, I like turned my life around. I like, stopped taking drugs. I started to like work hard at school. I got great grades. I like found a career. I found a sense of like purpose and meaning in my life. And And I also was like, what happened? Oh my days, what is going on here? Like this, like I had no way to explain this thing that had happened to me. And so I started to like learn about religion. I was like, okay, like I didn't have any content at the time. Like I didn't think that like I'd met the Christian God or something, because like I didn't know what that meant. Like I didn't know what it meant to like meet the Christian God or something. So if in case you're interested, God in Ralph Waldo Emerson is much more like it's not that kind of God. It's like it's much more diffuse in some sense. Though he was a Christian preacher at one point. Anyway, at first, where that took me was it took me to Buddhism, and I think the reason is that in many ways there's on-ramps to Buddhism for like a modern materialist atheist viewpoint. Like it's like very easy to be like, oh, this is like a process of the mind. Let me now kind of take that metaphysics and apply it. And I spent many years reading Buddhist texts. I went to Thailand. I studied with monks. I did retreats. I built a meditation practice. I learned about the tradition. Like to this day, I've read like 10 times as much on Buddhism as like anything else in my life. And I think, it started to answer a lot of questions for me. And what I found interesting was that as I learned more about it, I didn't just start to feel like I could start to make sense of this religious experience, but there were all of these other questions that partly I hadn't like realized were important questions that I hadn't like thought about much before this. So, there's questions about like consciousness. What is consciousness? How does consciousness operate? We actually have like no good answers to that. It's, and in some sense, it's like the most fundamental fact, and yet we have no kind of understanding of it whatsoever. I started to like have a frame to understand what consciousness was. Why was it there? What was it doing? There's a very like good Buddhist answers to this. I had questions around like, what is being? Like, why is there something rather than nothing? Again, I had like good answers to this from the Buddhist perspective. And then also around like ethics, like, as Samara was saying, there's a whole kind of meaning structure in terms of your relationship to people. And there's kind of like, we all have values and ethics and these kinds of things, but I started to think about them and understand ethics and values at a much richer level. Like there was much more sophistication in some sense, my ability to interact with these ethical questions. So I was kind of like doing that for over half a decade. And then I'd say about 3-4 years ago, I had a sense that I was still seeking in a big way. And in some sense, I think that once you're a seeker, you're always a seeker. But I was still a seeker in like a big way. And I had a sense that there was something missing in my understanding of the world. And I'd like read enough about all of the traditions in some sense at this point that I had like the broad strokes of like what different religions believe. And I had this kind of like sense that Christianity was calling to me and perhaps had been for a while, and that God had been seeking me in that way. That's probably sounding really weird again to some people. Anyway, a friend of mine happened to invite me to church, not kind of unprompted. I went, and I've been going to the same church ever since. There's another churchgoer at my church in this room, but I'm not going to point him out to be mean to him. And I'm not baptized yet, so if you're Christian, I know that that makes things complicated. I have a struggle with my particular church. It is what it is. I would like to be baptized. As I said, I believe in Jesus Christ, and I have a lot of other strange beliefs that come along with that now that I could talk about, and I can talk about all of the things that go with that. But that's kind of what I believe in my biography. And then in terms of the question of like, what should the role of religion be? So I think what I've come to believe about this is, I actually think religion is just a lot more reasonable than materialist atheism. I actually think that religion just makes a lot more sense and answers a lot more questions. I don't think religion as such is incompatible with science. It's not incompatible with an understanding of like physics, biology, chemistry. Certainly, if you look at top physicists, top biologists, top chemists, they don't seem to think that it's incompatible because many of them are religious. And so that I don't think there's an incompatibility on kind of like that base of knowledge that I have in my modern world. And then the religious perspectives has much better answers to these really important questions. Like there are like actual answers and explanations around things like consciousness, around things like why there is something rather than nothing, about the nature of ethics. And this is not an argument to say that one of them is more correct than the other. I certainly have worked through it in my own life and come to the decision that one of them is more correct than the other in some ways, right? That's why I can believe the things that I do. But I think that believing in religion in the general is just more reasonable. And so I think everybody should be a seeker. Like everybody should be like working out these questions. And there are reasons to start to work out these questions with the traditions that have the greatest depth and have been working on these questions the longest. And so those are your kind of like classics, right? Your Dharmic religions, your Abrahamic religions. They have more of a body of kind of knowledge to investigate here. And I think the role of religion should be, everyone should be religious. And we should be on that journey. That's everyone.
I'd like to begin with the Basmala, which is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, the name of God, the All-Merciful, the Mercy-Giving. I come to you with a formal greeting of Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, which is peace be upon you and God's mercy and blessings. I'd like to first begin with a quote from Muhammad Asad, a European man who converted to Islam in the mid-1900s, and he said something really interesting. And I quote, "The opening decades of the 20th century stood in the sign of a spiritual vacuum. All the ethical valuations to which Europe had been accustomed for so many centuries had become amorphous under the terrible impact of what had happened between 1914 and 1918, and no new set of values was yet anywhere in sight. A feeling of brittleness and insecurity was in the air, a presentiment of social and intellectual upheavals that made one doubt whether there could ever be any permanency in man's thoughts and endeavors. Everything seemed to be flowing in a formless flood, and the spiritual restlessness of youth could nowhere find a foothold. In the absence of any reliable standards of morality, nobody could give us young people satisfactory answers to the many questions that perplexed us. Science said cognition is everything, and forgot that cognition without an ethical goal can lead only to chaos. The social reformers, the revolutionaries, the communists, all of whom undoubtedly wanted to build of course, a better, happier world, were thinking only in terms of outward social and economic circumstances. And to bridge that defect, they had raised their materialistic conception of history to a kind of new anti-metaphysical metaphysics. You would think this was written today, but this was in fact written in 1954. Religion in its Islamic form must exist for 7 reasons. First, it does provide a holistic way of life. It's not an abstract set of beliefs, but sort of a way to think about different realms, including the personal, social, ethical, economic, and political. Secondly, it treats the consciousness of God as a foundation, as a way, what we call tawheed, as a unifying principle for all aspects of life. And this consciousness allows us to guide our human behavior and provides a framework for understanding the meaning and purpose of existence. Third, the integration of the spiritual and the material. While other civilizations struggle to reconcile these two realms, Islam was able to not create a dichotomy between both of these worlds and actually integrate both of them into human life. And it recognizes the validity of the physical world and the worldliness, but also emphasizes that they should be guided by a moral and spiritual awareness. 4, moral and ethical guidance. Religion, particularly Islam, provides a clear moral and ethical framework that helps individuals discern from right and wrong and live a potentially righteous life. This includes principles of justice, compassion, and responsibility towards others. 5th, a counter to materialism. The West's obsession with material progress as an end in and of itself, leading to spiritual emptiness and unhappiness. Islam offers an alternative by providing a balance between material well-being and spiritual fulfillment. And I'll quote again Muhammad Asad, where he says, "The average European, whether Democrat or communist, manual worker or intellectual, seem to only know one positive faith: the worship of material progress, the belief that there could be no other goal in life to make that life very continuously easier, as the current expression went, independent of nature. The temples of that faith were the gigantic factories, cinemas, and in the submission of all social and economic issues to the rule of expediency. That painted lady of the streets, willing to give herself to anybody at any time, whenever she is invoked. The insatiable craving after power and pleasure had of necessity led to the breakup of Western society into hostile groups, similar to what we have today, armed to the teeth and determined to destroy each other whenever and wherever their respective interests clashed. And on the cultural side, the outcome was the creation of a human type whose morality appeared to be confined to the question of practical utility alone, and whose highest criterion of right and wrong was material success. I saw how confused and unhappy our life had become, how little there was of real communion between man, despite all the strident, almost hysterical insistence on community and nation, how far we had strayed from our instincts and how narrow, how musty our souls had become. I saw all this, but somehow it never seriously occurred to me, as it never seems to have occurred to any of the people around me, that an answer, or at least partial answers to these perplexities might perhaps be gained from other than Europe's own cultural experiences. 6, a fulfillment of inner longing. Islam helps fulfill a deep, long-standing desire for humans to be part of a community, as was mentioned on the panel today, towards a common ideology and a shared way of life. 7, contrary to popular belief, Islam has a huge emphasis on reason and knowledge. And in fact, the Islamic golden age was largely driven by this pursuit of reason. We're encouraged to seek knowledge as a way to understand God's creation and his will. Islam does not call for blind subservience, but actually appeals to man's intellect and is evident in the various injunctions in the Quran where man and woman are inclined to think and ponder and reflect. And even through the message of the last prophet, reason was stressed as the only way to faith. Reason was stressed as the only way to faith. And I'll end with this quote again from Muhammad Asad. He says, "Here I saw a society in search of a new spiritual orientation after it had abandoned God. But apparently only a few Westerners realized what it was all about. The majority seemed to think consciously or subconsciously more or less along these lines. Since our reason, our scientific experiments, and our calculations do not reveal anything definite about the origin of human life and its destinies after bodily death, we ought to concentrate all our energies on the development of our material intellectual potential and not allow ourselves to be hampered by transcendental ethics and moral postulates based on assumptions which defy scientific proof. Thus, while Western society did not expressly deny God, it simply no longer had room for him in its intellectual system." And for myself, Islam is one of the last religions to offer a comprehensive, integrated, and ethically grounded way of life centered on the consciousness of God, providing meaning, purpose, and a balanced approach to both the spiritual and material dimensions of human existence. Religion must exist as the essential counterbalance to the void, to the nihilism, to the modern era. The divine question calls us to embrace our dual nature as both material and spiritual beings, offering what secular paradigms simply cannot, a coherent moral framework that provides meaning, community, and ethical guidance. By heeding this call, we restore balance to our existence. We enable societies grounded in justice and compassion rather than mere expediency, fulfilling our deepest longing for purpose beyond the purely material realm. Thank you.
Wow, those are pretty good. So
What we're going to do now is we're going to turn to small group discussion. And I think we probably have a lot to chew on and discuss. You have your prompt cards with the 3 questions that you'll be exploring in small groups. Those questions are, what should the role of religion in society be today? How would you define God? And why does it matter for progress? Or does it matter for progress? So we're going to be discussing those in groups of 4. You can kind of like self-select, although I want to do a quick little, self-selection on who's around the room today so that we don't end up with the same belief systems, maybe in the same group. So if you're comfortable raising your hand as I, say the examples, you can. If you want to put yourself in the other category at the end, that's totally fine as well. But this is just to kind of like for the people around you so you can be aware and make sure that we have a good, mixing in the groups. So I guess first, generally spiritual. Do you want to generally spiritual? Put up your hand. Okay.
Yeah, take notes of each other.
Yeah, look around. Okay. What about pure atheist? Okay. What about Muslim? If you identify as Muslim, okay. What about Christian? Christian, okay. Oh, we have pretty big mix. If you're Jewish, put up your hand. Okay. And Hindu, put up your hand. What about Buddhist and other? Okay, other.
Others.
Put up your hand if you're other.
Others like the majority.
The other is the majority. Okay.
confused.
Okay, like put up your hand if you're like actively seeking, but you haven't found, you know. Okay, okay. Sold that one the best. All right, so at this point, you can turn and get yourself into groups of 4, and feel free to begin answering those questions that are on your prompts. Sorry? Maybe we'll wait 20 minutes. Yeah. Okay.
And if you don't have a prompt card and would like one, I can give you a prompt card.
Are they all different?
For those of us who are joining on the live stream, Hey! We're gonna bring it back together for just a few minutes because I want to hear from some of the insights that people might have heard or shared in the group. So I'm gonna ask for like 5 volunteers if you want to put up your hand and like share maybe some highlights or your own perspective. We'll give you the mic. The live stream can hear us, and they apparently have been following along and sharing their ideas on Twitter as well, or in the stream. So does anybody want to kick us off and actually share what came up? Totally open-ended. Yeah.
Hey guys, what's going on? Okay, so I feel like the people that I was talking to in this area that are not religious or do not practice something, everybody said that. I guess that's also why they're here, but they don't practice because what has been presented to them they don't like, or the way that it was presented they don't like, and but they recognize the value and are looking for something. So if somebody has a solution to offer us, we're in the market. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Another one, anybody? You can go first.
I can go. So in this area, like we kind of realize there's like a big rise in spiritual but not religious people. That is to say that a significant amount of people are seeking answers and are seeking kind of they're asking questions. Right. That's the reason why we're having this event in the first place. This is mainly, I guess, like my idea, but we kind of came up with it together. Essentially, the reason why that's happening is because essentially Western liberalism has failed. There was a high watermark of liberalism in the 90s and the early 2000s, where essentially, that was the end of civilization, right? Fukuyama is essentially saying that, we've reached the best state of humanity. Capitalism and liberalism is the best, right? More units of freedom is always good for more people, and essentially that's not been true, because we've essentially, when we've maximized freedom, we've actually caused more harm to people, right? So someone sent me, an interesting article. Someone sent me an interesting article about, for example, feminists who are now writing against, the sexual revolution, right? Because essentially the harms of giving maximum freedom, sexual freedom to women were actually more harmful to women, right? The second example, and this might be controversial, is that, for example, assigning puberty blockers to, children as young as 8, right? That is essentially, that makes no sense in any civilization in history, except for ours, when we think that maximum freedom is always maximally good. And we're kind of realizing that that's not the case, because, more units of freedom isn't better. And I've been attending, so I'm I would say, I'm not baptized. I'm like a Christian in training. I'm kind of learning. And the most compelling thing to me is that, the moral frameworks that they essentially ask me to say, you need to give away parts of your freedom and follow all these rules. Some of them you really like, some of them you won't like. I just couldn't find a compelling argument for why we probably should all do some version of that, because that's ultimately just a better world. So yeah, that's kind of what we realized.
Did you want to?
Us over here again, we had a discussion, and some of the people I spoke to were questioning what really was, the whole point of everything. Why couldn't we just exist and enjoy, meeting new people and enjoying those experiences? Because we question the supreme and what it means to be being so much, and we forget the sense of I. And me being a Christian, I'm a really strong Christian by faith. It's more of a personal journey where we always question what questions are being answered. The questions we have, are they really being answered by what we practice? And in a whole sense of religion, as we all have certain facets of our life where we pour our religion in. It might be opening your phone every morning or something, but in a certain way we believe in something. And there's a philosophic term called teleological suspension by Kierkegaard. If you want to answer, learn more about your religion, I'll advise you to read Kierkegaard, Buber, or Sartre. And he spoke a lot. He really questioned what Christianity is. There was a specific guy who was a Christian, as if you grew up in a Catholic school, they'll tell you about is Abraham, where they told him, please go on. He had a dream. God came to him in the middle of the night and told him to go and kill his son. He processed that thought. He could have spoken to his wife. He had days to think about that thought before he killed his son or wanted to kill his son. And he didn't kill his son, actually, but he thought about it a lot. And he made that decision. And it's sort of like, are you really comfortable as a person with the morality of what your religion is? And is it really giving you answers? Because as humans, we would always question our purpose and existentialism in general. And that sense of purpose, that sense of being, is what religion tends to just help us, continually just push on. Yeah, some people tend to go through some crazy life crisis and it answers that question for them. Some people might not have experienced that. It might just be this eureka moment and they feel it. But it's, to me, and when we had the whole discussion, is like, as you continually just progress in life, there are certain things that might fill that void for you. Religion tends to help you just fill that void. Yeah, it might not necessarily be a welcome space at times, but as you meet more people, you get to learn more insights are you derive from that, and it answers those questions for you. In all aspects, we all believe in something, and that tends to just push us. And that's what religion is. I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Awesome. Yep.
When people say that they're looking to religion to get answers to questions, I don't think the questions are about what's ethical, what's moral, or how should society run. I think the question is always actually just who am I or who should I be? And I think one has two options. Either you can give yourself permission to be whoever you want, or religion does. Either option is okay. By the way, you have to answer that question.
Awesome. Thank you.
To kind of build on that, I think I am someone who was raised religious and has recently gone through the process of questioning that, trying to understand whether that's for me, and have come to the answer that it's not. But that's created a sort of void in my life that was very easily filled before. And so even the question that was initially asked of, when you're looking for something but don't know where to go, what do you do? And then the rise in spirituality, I would say that one of the most interesting things about spirituality, and I've been seeing a little bit more about this recently, is that the reason that I chose, or the reason I felt like religion wasn't for me anymore, is because every time I faced a contradiction, and we spoke a little bit about this here, is that every time I faced a contradiction with religion, I wasn't allowed to fully go into that, and nor was I allowed to find an answer. There was always these mental gymnastics that I would have to do to explain to myself why I have to continue believing. And that got me to a place where I realized I can still look to religion to get answers to these questions that I would never be able to answer, where what happens after life? What's the meaning of life? Why should I do what I'm doing? But I don't have to believe in the stories and the theology of religion to do that, nor do I have to pick one over the other. I can kind of go in and understand what makes sense for me, understand what's right, understand what's not right, because all religions exists out there in the same way that all different philosophies do, and religion in the end is kind of a philosophy. And the point of philosophy is to work through a lot of them, is how I feel. And that's the kind of approach I'm taking to religion as well, where I'm like, I'm not religious because I don't want to do the mental gymnastics of trying to explain these stories or contradictions that come up with my own observations in the world. But at the same time, I do think that a lot of religions offer a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different answers to the questions that I'm having. And I can analyze and look at all of them and feel them out, and then pick the ones that make sense to me and continue living my life in a good way, if that makes sense.
Anybody else?
Oh, I got it.
Oh, you got it. Okay.
Yeah, so one thing we were talking about, this question came up about how do you derive your moral framework then, right? Is it through God, or is it through some like utilitarianism or virtue ethics or whatnot? And one thing we ended up agreeing on, this was something we were arguing about, but the only point of discussion was that it's somehow easier to trust somebody who's religious because their moral framework is accountable to a higher being and it's divinely ordained. So, make of that what you will. But yeah, if you're religious, it's easier for people to trust you.
Yeah, I think I'll keep this short by saying I think there's a role that religion and spirituality plays that modern therapy doesn't quite add up to, and it comes for those times where you go through like a new paradigm shift and you don't know exactly what to do. And I think spirituality and religion are the best at that for now, and are able to really dive into like the deeper archetypes and stories that shape us.
Hi. So, something that I've kind of been thinking about over the last few years, as far as what's the role of religion in society, is that I'm 24, and I think the life expectancy in Canada is, I think it's like what 83, right? And so I know what you're all thinking. I'm going to ask the question of like, what happens after death, right? But that's actually not the question that I've been grappling with over the last few years. For me, it's how do I make sure that the next 60 years are fulfilling and meaningful? And what I've personally found is that no matter what your religious background is, or even if you're an atheist, if you're agnostic, I'm actually a Baha'i, which is a smaller religion. It's 10 to 12 million people around the world. So I'm in like the other category from earlier tonight. And for me, what I've sort of learned from the Baha'i faith, as well as other religions, is that if you want to have a fulfilling life, it's all about being of service to other people. And so that could be through your work. I know there are a lot of startup people here. If you're founding a startup with the aim of helping others, you're going to have a fulfilling life. If you start a family, that's fulfilling. You're helping your kids, you're helping your neighbors. That's kind of what like my general answer to one of the questions on the card from earlier today. So
Thank you. And we'll do one more, maybe. Last one.
And we're here. Hey guys. So we didn't really get into it with my group, but a question we started to explore, which I haven't heard much about tonight, so I'm just going to bring it up, is by virtue of everyone who's here tonight and wants to have this conversation, it's a pretty pluralist and exploratory group. But kind of speaking personally as someone who's had, within my extended family, newsworthy Christian extremists who kind of have gone off a completely different path than the rest of the family, reconciling my own faith and my own, Christian upbringing with, family members who quite literally wish harm upon others or even members of their own family. I think that the kind of grappling with all of these positives, which we've heard so many tonight, and I obviously share some of those as I still consider myself religious, that we do have to account for, what happens, what safeguards, what responsibility do we have to one another to take care of one another and to allow each of us to seek our own truths. What does that look like in a space where you're still allowed to practice whatever you want? So what is the tolerance of intolerance? What is the intolerance of intolerance? It's just an interesting kind of thing to noodle on. We didn't get too deep into it, but just something I'd encourage. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, we'll end there. We're going to thank you all for coming, first of all. We're going to hang around until 9:30, so you can continue to have these conversations with other people in the room. Feel free to mingle. Ben, did you want to close off with a couple notes?
I guess I should pitch the Toronto Society for the Diffusion of Useful Knowledge. Just in case you don't, we have a Twitter account and an Instagram account. You should follow those. If you use Luma, you should subscribe to our calendar on Luma. I am very interested to get feedback from people on this event to see if there are what we could learn from this experiment and if there are more experiments about this. I think this is a really interesting topic of conversation. There are many rich veins here to be explored, more than just the kind of surface level questions. So I'd love to see if there are follow-up events here. But yeah, generally I hope I'll see you at more Toronto Society events. And I guess that's my pitch.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Cool. I'm going to put the music back on, but feel free to mingle amongst yourselves.
you.